And going through the Bible book by book and chapter by chapter. We're in Joshua chapter 5. There's a lot of things that are going on here. The people have crossed over into the land of Canaan. They've crossed the river Jordan. The kings of the Amorites have heard that the people have come. And when they hear this, their hearts melt in verse 1. But at that time, the children of the people who had been born in the wilderness weren't circumcised. And if you remember back in Genesis, Abraham is given the covenant of circumcision. So everybody is going to become a descendant of Abraham in the flesh. From that point forward, was going to be circumcised. Well, none of the children were circumcised while they were in the wilderness. It's almost like that portion of the covenant or that portion of their relationship with God was forgotten. And when they come into the promised land, they have to be circumcised. And so what we can see here is the parents' faith, or the parents' relationship, the parents' circumcision, wasn't good enough for the children. The children have to have their own faith, their own relationship, their own circumcision. And so everything that we're teaching our children it's not going to be good enough for our children to have our faith. Children must grow and learn and develop their own faith. They have to have their own circumcision. And so as we teach our children, it's not with the goal to program them to believe what I believe. It's with the goal to program them or to teach them what they need in order to have faith, in order to have a relationship with God. That's our goal, is to help our children have a relationship with God. And that's what the sign of this covenant is establishing, God's relationship with these people who were the children of those who died in the wilderness. Well, you keep going down, and it talks about how they're going to go into the promised land, and they're going to eat for the very first time food from the promised land. And as soon as they eat food from the promised land, the manna that God had been giving them on a daily basis stops coming. Well, it's not that now God wasn't going to provide for them anymore. It's that God is providing for them in a different way. God is the one who's given them the promised land. God is the one who's giving them the food that they're going to be eating from the promised land. This is what God has been building them for and growing them for and training them for all throughout the years they've been spending in the wilderness, is so that when they come to the promised land, they will have enough faith and enough trust in Him, in His power, in His might, His majesty, so that when they get to the promised land, they'll continue to trust in God. When there is an abundance of things, God has promised them land, God has promised them fruit, God has promised them food, and now He's brought them to those promises, and so He stops providing the manna. It also shows us that not only is God a God of promise, and He keeps His promises, but He's a God of purpose. Once He's brought them into the promised land, there's no need for the manna, and so the manna quits coming. And so as we're reading through this chapter, in Joshua chapter 5, there's a lot of things that we can see. Children have to have their own faith. People have always feared the Lord. And God is a God of promise, which He keeps. He keeps His promises, and He's a God of purpose. Everything that God does has a reason. It has a purpose. We may not understand what the reason is, what the purpose is, but it's always there. And so as we're reading through the Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, this is Joshua chapter 5.